The morning cold cut through Pinewood, Maine like a blade through old cloth. February had settled into the small town with the weight of something that knew it wasn't leaving soon. Snow lined the streets in dirty ridges where plows had pushed it aside weeks ago. The pines stood dark against the sky that couldn't decide between gray and white. Garrett Holloway's truck rolled down Main Street just after dawn. The engine rattled in a way that said it had been running since before most of the younger mechanics in town were born. He drove with one hand, the other resting on the seat beside him where Riley sat. The German Shepherd was 7 years old, her coat a mix of black and tan that caught what little light filtered through the windshield. Her amber eyes tracked everything: the empty storefronts, the single traffic light swinging on its cable, the diner up ahead with its hand-painted sign barely visible through frost. Garrett pulled into the gravel lot and killed the engine. Silence rushed in to fill the space. He sat there for a moment studying the building. Pine Diner. The wood was weathered, the color of old bone, the kind of wear that came from decades, not years. A neon sign in the window blinked the word "open" in red letters, one of them half dead and flickering. Riley shifted beside him, her ears angling forward. Not alert. Not yet, just aware. Garrett reached for the door handle. His fingers were thick, scarred across the knuckles from 28 years of decisions made with his hands instead of words. He wore what he always wore, a faded field jacket, the color of olives left too long in the jar, a red and black flannel shirt beneath it, cargo pants that had seen better decades, and boots that had outlasted 3 deployments and a divorce. The watch on his left wrist was military issue. The face was scratched to hell, but it still kept time. That was all that mattered. He stepped out into the cold. Riley followed her movements, precise. She wore a black harness across her shoulders, the kind that said she wasn't a pet. The leather was worn smooth where Garrett's hand had rested 1,000 times. They crossed the lot together. Gravel crunched under their feet. The air smelled like snow and old fryer grease. Garrett reached the door and pulled it open. The hinges groaned. Warmth rolled out, carrying the smell of coffee and something burning on a griddle. Riley stopped. Her front paws were on the threshold, but she didn't move forward. Her body went still in a way Garrett recognized immediately. It was the same stillness as she'd shown in Kuwait in 1991 when she was younger and the sand was full of things designed to kill. Riley didn't bark. She didn't whine. She just stopped, her attention locked on something inside the diner that Garrett couldn't see. He stood there, hands still on the door, cold air mixing with warm. His pulse didn't change. Years of training had taught him not to rush the first signal. The second signal was always worse because you'd already ignored the first. "What is it?" he said quietly. Riley's ears rotated forward, tracking sound. Her nose lifted slightly, reading air currents. Then slowly she took one step inside. Then another, but her body stayed coiled, ready. Garrett followed her in. The diner was small. A counter ran along the left side with 8 stools bolted to the floor. 4 booths lined the right wall, their vinyl cracked and patched with duct tape. The walls were bare wood, darkened by decades of smoke, back when people still lit cigarettes over breakfast. The floor was linoleum, scuffed to gray, and the paths where feet had worn it down. 3 people sat at the counter: an old man in a wool coat, a younger guy in a reflective vest, probably from the road crew, a woman in her 50s with her hair pulled back tight, eating eggs without looking up. Behind the counter stood another woman, 63 years old. Heavy through the shoulders and hips, her face lined deep around the mouth and eyes. Her hair was gray, pulled into a bun so tight it looked like it hurt. She wore a wine-colored sweater beneath a stained white apron. Keys hung from her waist on a chain, clinking softly every time she moved. This was Margaret Hale, owner, manager. The woman whose name was on the deed and on the complaints filed with the county about health code violations that never quite stuck. She looked up when Garrett entered. Her eyes went to Riley first, then to him. Her mouth tightened. "Dog stays quiet in here," she said. Not asking, telling. "She will," Garrett replied. He moved toward the counter, Riley at his side. The old man in the wool coat glanced at the door, then smiled faintly. "Morning, Walter," Garrett said. "Morning, Garrett." Walter Hayes was 70 years old and had lived in Pinewood since before Pinewood was worth living in. His voice had the rough texture of someone who'd smoked for 40 years and quit for 20. "She working today?" Garrett understood the question. Riley wasn't a pet. People in town had started to figure that out. "Retired," Garrett said, "but she remembers." Walter nodded and went back to his coffee. Garrett took a stool 2 down from the road crew guy. Riley sat beside him, her body positioned so she could see the entire room. Her gaze settled on the narrow hallway at the back of the diner, the one that led to the kitchen. Margaret moved down the counter with a coffee pot. She filled Garrett's cup without asking if he wanted any. Then she moved away again, keys clinking. Garrett wrapped his hands around the mug. The warmth felt good. His knuckles ached in the cold these days. Arthritis, the doctor said. Souvenir from carrying too much weight over too much bad terrain. That's when he saw her. She came out of the kitchen carrying a tray stacked with plates. 39 years old, though she looked younger from exhaustion rather than youth. Thin in a way that wasn't about fitness. Her hair was light brown with hints of auburn, pulled back into a knot at the base of her neck. Wisps had escaped and hung around her face. Her eyes were a muted green-gray, the color of old glass. She wore a denim shirt with the sleeves rolled down, despite the heat from the kitchen. A canvas apron faded brown tied at her waist. Dark jeans, practical boots. Her name was Eva Brennan, though Garrett didn't know that yet. She moved carefully. Each step measured as if the floor might give way if she put her weight down wrong. When she reached the counter, she set the plates down in front of the road crew guy and the woman with tight hair. Her movements were efficient, practiced, but there was something else underneath, a kind of tension that lived in her shoulders in the way she held her breath when Margaret passed behind her. Riley's ears pricked forward. Eva glanced at the dog. For just a second, something crossed her face. Not fear, something softer. Recognition, maybe, or longing. Then Margaret's voice cut through the room. Eva, refills. Eva's shoulders tightened. She reached for the coffee pot without a word and began moving down the counter. When she got to Garrett, she paused. You need anything else? She asked. Her voice was quiet, careful. I'm good, Garrett said. She nodded and started to turn away. That's when her sleeve slipped back just an inch, just enough. The bruise on her wrist was old, yellowed at the edges, fading to green near the center. Not fresh, but not gone either. Garrett didn't stare, didn't react, just noted it the way he'd been trained to note things. Evidence, context, patterns. Eva pulled her sleeve down and moved away. Riley stood up. She didn't bark, didn't lunge. She simply walked across the narrow space between the counter and the booths and sat down directly beside Eva's leg. Close enough that Eva could feel her warmth. Close enough that if Eva moved, Riley would know. Eva froze. The coffee pot trembled slightly in her hand. Margaret turned from the register, her face hard. Your dog's blocking the aisle. Riley, Garrett said quietly. The dog looked at him. For a moment, she didn't move. Then slowly she stood and walked back to Garrett's side. But her eyes never left Eva. Garrett finished his coffee in silence. The clock on the wall ticked through another 10 minutes. The road crew guy paid and left. The woman with tight hair followed. Walter stayed nursing his cup like it was the only warm thing in his day. Eva cleared the plates. She moved past Margaret twice, and both times Garrett saw it. The way Eva made herself smaller. The way she angled her body to take up less space. The way she flinched just barely when Margaret's keys clinked. Riley's breathing changed, slower, deeper, the same rhythm she used when she was counting something, measuring. Garrett had seen enough. He pulled a 10 from his wallet and left it on the counter. Then he walked out into the cold with Riley at his side. The door swung shut behind them. The sound echoed across the empty lot. He didn't get in the truck right away. He stood there, breath fogging in the air, and looked back at the diner. Through the window, he could see Eva wiping down tables. Margaret stood behind the counter, arms crossed, watching. Riley sat beside him, her attention still fixed on the building. You saw something, Garrett said. Riley glanced up at him, then back at the diner. Garrett knew that look. He'd seen it in the Kuwaiti desert in 1991 when Riley was younger and the world was full of sand and fire. She'd stopped walking in the middle of a night patrol, her body going rigid. Garrett had trusted her then, trusted her enough to halt the entire squad. They'd found 3 anti-tank mines buried 2 feet ahead, daisy-chained together. If Riley hadn't stopped, there wouldn't have been enough of them left to fill a body bag. She'd saved them twice. Once with the mines, once with a sniper they never saw until Riley's growl made them hit the ground a half-second before the shot went wide. After that, Garrett stopped questioning her instincts. He climbed into the truck. Riley jumped up beside him. The engine turned over with a cough and a shudder. He sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Then he drove home. The cabin was 3 miles outside town, tucked into the pines where the road turned to gravel, and the nearest neighbor was far enough away that you couldn't hear them scream. It was small, one room with a wood stove, a narrow bed, a table, and a chair. The walls were unfinished pine. The floor was cold. Garrett had bought it with the last of his savings after the divorce came through, and the VA benefits weren't enough to cover rent anywhere that didn't smell like mold and desperation. It wasn't much, but it was his. Riley had her corner near the stove, a blanket, a water bowl, a chew toy she'd stopped touching 2 years ago. She went to it now and lay down, but she didn't relax. Her eyes stayed open, tracking Garrett as he moved around the small space. He made coffee on the camp stove, the same kind he'd used in the field. Simple, reliable. While the water boiled, he stood at the window and looked out at the trees. Snow clung to the branches. The light was already fading, even though it was barely noon. Winter in Maine lasted longer than most wars. His mind kept circling back to the diner, to Eva, to the bruise, to the way she moved like someone who'd learned that being noticed was dangerous. He'd seen it before. In villages outside Fallujah where women walked with their eyes down. In shelters where the lights were too bright and the doors locked from the inside. In the faces of people who'd spent so long being afraid that fear had become a language they spoke without thinking. Riley whined softly. Garrett turned. The dog was sitting now, staring at him with an intensity that was almost human. "I know," he said. She whined again. Not loud, not desperate, just insistent. Garrett poured the coffee and sat at the table, his hands wrapped around the mug, but he didn't drink. He just sat there thinking. The problem with instincts was that they didn't come with instructions. Riley had stopped at the diner. Fine. She'd positioned herself beside Eva. Fine. But what did that mean? What was she sensing? What was the threat? Garrett didn't have answers. Not yet. But he had experience. And experience had taught him that the first signal was always small. A hesitation, a glance, a dog that refused to move. If you ignored it, the second signal came louder. And by the time you got to the third signal, someone was usually bleeding. He finished his coffee and stood. Riley stood with him, tail low, eyes bright. "All right," Garrett said. "We'll go back tomorrow." That night, he didn't sleep well. The dreams came the way they always did when something felt unfinished. Flashes of desert and fire. The sound of mortars punching holes in the dark. The smell of burning fuel and copper. The weight of Corporal Jenkins in his arms, blood soaking through Garrett's gloves, Jenkins saying something Garrett couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. He woke just after 3 in the morning, heart-pounding sheets soaked with sweat. Riley was on the bed beside him, pressed against his chest. Her weight was warm and solid and real. He focused on her breathing, in and out, slow and steady. After a while, his own breathing matched hers. He didn't sleep again after that. By the time dawn crept through the window, Garrett was already dressed. He fed Riley, made more coffee, and checked the time. The diner opened at 6. He'd be there at 6:15. The drive into town felt longer than it was. The sky was pale and empty, the kind of light that made everything look washed out. When he pulled into the diner's lot, there were 2 other vehicles already there. A rusted Chevy and a newer Ford with county plates. Garrett parked and killed the engine. Riley sat beside him waiting. "Same as yesterday," he said. "You tell me what you see." They went inside. The smell was the same, coffee and grease and old wood. The same 3 stools were occupied. Walter Hayes in his wool coat. A different road crew guy. A woman Garrett didn't recognize. Margaret stood behind the counter pouring coffee with sharp, efficient movements. Her eyes flicked to Garrett, then to Riley. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't say anything. Eva came out of the kitchen carrying plates. She wore the same denim shirt, the same apron, the same boots. Her hair was pulled back the same way. If Garrett hadn't been looking, he might have thought she was the same person from yesterday, wearing the same clothes, living the same day on repeat. But he was looking, and this time he saw more. The way Eva's eyes tracked Margaret's movements, always keeping her in peripheral vision. The way her hands shook slightly when she set down plates. The way she held her breath when Margaret passed too close. Riley walked straight to her and sat down. Same spot as yesterday, right beside Eva's leg. Eva looked down at the dog. This time she didn't freeze. She just stood there staring, and for a moment something cracked in her expression. Not fear, something deeper, something that looked like grief. Margaret's voice cut through the air. Orders up." Eva's face went blank. She turned and walked back to the kitchen without a word. Riley stayed where she was. Garrett sat at the counter. Margaret poured his coffee without asking. Walter glanced over and nodded. "She likes Eva," Walter said quietly. "Seems that way," Garrett replied. Walter took a sip of his coffee. "You know, I've been coming to this diner for 16 years, every morning. Same stool, same coffee." Garrett didn't say anything, just waited. "Eva started working here around the same time," Walter continued. 2008, maybe 2009. Young thing, quiet. Margaret said she was helping her out, giving her a place to stay while she got back on her feet. "That's kind of her," Garrett said carefully. Walter's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Yeah, real kind. The silence stretched out between them. Garrett drank his coffee. It was bad coffee, bitter and weak at the same time, but it was hot. You ever see Eva anywhere else? Garrett asked. Around town, I mean. Walter shook his head slowly. Never. Not once in 16 years. Not at the grocery store, not at the post office, not at church, nowhere. Maybe she doesn't like going out. Maybe, Walter said. Or maybe she can't. The words hung there. Eva came back out with more plates. She moved past Garrett without looking at him. Riley turned her head, tracking Eva's movements, then stood and followed her, not aggressive, just close. Margaret's keys clinked. Your dog needs to stay out of the way. Riley, Garrett said. The dog looked at him. This time she didn't move right away. She looked back at Eva. Then slowly she returned to Garrett's side. Garrett finished his coffee and paid. He left the same $10 bill on the counter. Then he walked out into the cold. But this time he didn't go home. He drove to the library. The Pinewood Public Library was a small brick building 2 blocks off Main Street. It smelled like old paper and radiator heat. The woman at the front desk was in her 50s with graying hair and reading glasses on a chain. Her name tag said Irene Walsh. Help you find something, she asked. Public records, Garrett said. Property deeds, business licenses, that kind of thing. Irene studied him for a moment. Then she nodded and led him to a back room where filing cabinets lined the walls. What are you looking for specifically? Pine Diner. Who owns it? How long they've owned it? Irene pulled open a drawer and flipped through files. She found what she was looking for and handed it to Garrett. Margaret Hale. She bought the place in 1987. Outright. No mortgage. Garrett opened the file and scanned the documents. Property deed, business license, tax records. Everything looked normal. Clean. What about employees? He asked. Irene frowned. That'd be with the state, not here. But I can tell you I've never seen Margaret file payroll taxes. Far as I know, she runs the place herself. She has help, a woman named Eva. Eva Brennan, Irene said quietly. I know who you mean. You know her. I know of her. Irene crossed her arms. She came in here once, maybe 10 years ago. Wanted to check out a book. Didn't have a library card. I asked for her driver's license to make one. She didn't have one. Asked for a state ID. Didn't have that either. I told her I'd need some kind of identification. She left and never came back. Garrett closed the file. Thanks. You're not the first person to ask about her, you know, Irene said. No. No, Vernon Kemp asked about her a few years back. He's the police chief. Said he'd gotten a tip about someone being held against their will. He went to the diner, talked to Margaret, talked to Eva. Eva said everything was fine. Vernon couldn't do anything without a complaint. Far as the law's concerned, if she won't say she needs help, there's nothing to be done. Garrett nodded slowly. What do you think? Irene was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I think some cages don't have bars. Garrett left the library and sat in his truck for a while, engine idling, heat blowing through the vents. Riley sat beside him watching. He thought about Eva, about the bruises, about the way she moved, about Walter's words. 16 years. Never seen anywhere else. Never. He thought about the filing cabinet in the library. No driver's license, no ID, no library card. He thought about Irene's words. Some cages don't have bars. His phone rang. The number was local. He answered. Mr. Holloway. A man's voice. Calm, professional. Yeah. This is Declan Hartwell. I'm an attorney here in Pinewood. Irene Walsh gave me your number. Said you were asking questions about Margaret Hale and Eva Brennan. Garrett said nothing. I'd like to talk to you, Declan continued. Off the record, there are some things you should know. They met at Declan's office an hour later. The office was above the hardware store on Main Street, reached by a narrow staircase that creaked under Garrett's weight. The room was small, crowded with filing cabinets and stacks of paper. Declan Hartwell was 62, broad through the shoulders with thinning hair and a beard he kept too short. He had the look of a man who'd been louder once and learned restraint the hard way. He gestured to a chair. Garrett sat. Riley lay at his feet. I've been practicing law in this town for 30 years, Declan said. I've seen a lot of things. Some of them I can't talk about. Some of them I can't stop thinking about. Which one is this? Garrett asked. Both. Declan leaned back in his chair. Eva Brennan doesn't exist. Not legally. No social security number on file. No tax records. No birth certificate that I can find. It's like she appeared out of nowhere in 2008 and never left the diner. How is that possible? It's not supposed to be. But if someone doesn't interact with the system doesn't know they exist. No bank account means no tax forms. No driver's license means no records with the DMV. No medical insurance means no hospital visits. She's invisible. Margaret's doing that on purpose. I believe so, and I believe Eva's letting her. Garrett frowned. Why? Declan sighed. Fear, gratitude, guilt. Maybe all three. Margaret took her in when she had nothing, gave her a place to stay, gave her work. And now Eva feels like she owes her, like leaving would be ungrateful, disloyal. That's not gratitude, that's control. Yes, Declan said quietly. It is. Garrett looked down at Riley. The dog was resting her head on his boot. Can you do anything about it? Not without Eva's cooperation, and Eva won't cooperate. Vernon tried, I tried. Every time someone asks her if she's okay, she says yes. Every time someone offers help, she says no. As long as she says that there's nothing we can do. The law can't save someone who won't admit they need saving. Garrett stood. Then maybe the law's not what she needs. Declan studied him. Be careful, Mr. Holloway. Margaret's desperate. Desperate people are dangerous. I've dealt with dangerous before. I'm sure you have. But this isn't a war zone. This is a small town. People talk, people watch. If you're going to do something, make sure you're ready for what comes after. Garrett left the office and walked back to his truck. The sun was setting the sky, bruised purple and orange. Riley jumped into the passenger seat and sat watching him. He started the engine but didn't drive. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, thinking. Eva Brennan, 39 years old. 16 years in the same place, wearing the same clothes, living the same day over and over. No ID, no freedom. No life outside the walls of a diner that smelled like old grease and older fear. And Margaret Hale, 63, owner, employer, captor. Garrett had spent 28 years in the Marines learning how to identify threats, how to neutralize them, how to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. This was a threat, and Eva couldn't protect herself. He looked at Riley. What do you think? The dog stared back at him, amber eyes steady. Garrett put the truck in gear and drove home. The cabin was dark when he got there. He lit the wood stove and made coffee. Riley lay in her corner, but she didn't sleep. She kept looking at the door, then at Garrett, then back at the door. I know, he said again. That night the dreams came harder. Kuwait, 1991. The desert at night lit by fire. The sound of artillery. Corporal Jenkins bleeding out on the sand, his hand gripping Garrett's jacket, his mouth moving, but no sound coming out. Garrett trying to stop the bleeding, his hands slick and useless, the smell of copper thick enough to choke on. And Riley, young Riley, barking at something Garrett couldn't see, warning him, telling him to move, to pay attention, to act before it was too late. He woke before dawn, drenched in sweat. Riley pressed against his chest. Okay, he whispered. Okay. He got dressed in the dark, fed Riley, made coffee he didn't drink. Then he drove back to the diner. It was still closed when he arrived. The lot was empty. The lights were off, but Garrett parked and waited. At 5:45, a car pulled in. An old sedan rusted around the wheel wells. Eva got out. She wore the same denim shirt, the same apron, the same boots. She walked to the door with a key and let herself in. Lights flickered on inside. Garrett waited another 30 minutes. Then he went in. Eva was behind the counter filling the coffee maker. She looked up when he entered, surprise crossing her face. We're not open yet, she said. I know. Garrett sat at the counter. Riley sat beside him. I wanted to talk to you. Eva's hands stilled. About what? About how long you've been here. Her face went carefully blank. I don't understand. 16 years, Garrett said. That's how long, since 2008. And in all that time you've never left. Never been to the grocery store. Never been to the library. Never been anywhere. I don't like crowds. You don't have a driver's license. No bank account, no social security number on file. Eva's breathing quickened. Who are you? Someone who knows what it looks like when a person's being held against their will. I'm not. Her voice was firm, too firm, the kind of firm that came from practice. Margaret gave me a job when I had nothing. She lets me stay upstairs. I'm fine. You're not fine. You don't know me. I know enough. Eva turned away, gripping the edge of the sink. Her knuckles were white. You need to leave. Not until you tell me the truth. I did. No, you told me what you've been telling yourself for 16 years, that you owe her, that she saved you, that you can't leave because you'd be ungrateful. But that's not the truth. The truth is you're afraid. And you've been afraid for so long, you don't know how to be anything else. Ava spun around. Her eyes were wet. You don't understand. She did save me. I was 23. I had nothing. No money, no family, nowhere to go. I was sleeping in my car. She found me in the parking lot and brought me inside. Gave me food. Gave me a place to stay. Gave me a reason to keep going. And then she stopped letting you leave. She didn't stop me. I chose to stay. Did you, or did she just make leaving feel impossible? Eva's hands were shaking. It's not like that. Then leave, right now. Walk out that door with me and don't come back. I can't. Why not? Because I we, her, or. The words echoed teared in the empty diner. Eva covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. Garrett stood slowly. He kept his voice low, gentle. You don't owe her your life. You don't understand, Eva whispered. I have nowhere to go, no money, no skills, no way to survive out there. Here I know what to expect. Here I'm safe. You're not safe. You're trapped. And there's a difference. Before Eva could respond, the back door opened. Margaret walked in, keys clinking at her waist. She stopped when she saw Garrett. We're closed, she said coldly. We were just talking, Garrett said. Well, you're done. Margaret's eyes went to Eva. Get the grill started. We open in 10 minutes. Eva wiped her face quickly and moved toward the kitchen without another word. Margaret stepped closer to Garrett. She was shorter than him, but she stood like someone who'd learned to take up space. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to stop. Eva's fine. She's happy here, and she doesn't need you filling her head with ideas. Ideas like freedom. Ideas like leaving. She's tried that before. It didn't work out. She came back because she knows this is where she belongs. She came back because she didn't have a choice. Margaret's jaw tightened. Get out. Garrett held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Riley followed. But as he reached the exit, he stopped and looked back. Eva was visible through the kitchen doorway, her back to him, shoulders hunched. If you change your mind, Garrett said loud enough for her to hear, I'll be around. He walked out into the cold. The door swung shut behind him. He stood in the parking lot, breath fogging, hands shaking. Riley sat beside him, looking up. We're not done, Garrett said. The dog's tail thumped once against the gravel. They got in the truck and drove away. But Garrett's mind was already moving, calculating, planning. He'd spent 16 years in Kuwait, Iraq, Somalia, and a dozen other places where the rules were written in blood. He knew how to fight. But this wasn't a fight. Not yet. This was something quieter, something slower, something that required patience and precision and the willingness to see what others had ignored for 16 years. Eva Brennan was a prisoner, and Garrett Holloway was about to dismantle her cage one piece at a time, whether she was ready or not. The Pinewood Public Library closed at 5 on weekdays. Garrett knew this because he'd spent the last 3 days watching patterns, watching how the town moved, watching who went where and when, old habits from a life that was supposed to be behind him but never really left. He parked across the street at 4:30 and waited. Riley sat in the passenger seat, her attention fixed on the library's front door. She knew waiting. She'd done it in bunkers and checkpoints and places where patience was the difference between coming home and being carried home. At 5:05, Irene Walsh emerged. She wore a long brown coat and carried a canvas bag over her shoulder. She locked the door behind her and started down the sidewalk toward the municipal parking lot. Garrett got out of the truck. Mrs. Walsh, he called. She turned, recognized him, and stopped. Mr. Holloway, I need to ask you something about public records. Irene glanced around the empty street. The sky was already darkening, the winter sunset bleeding out behind the pines. Walk with me. They fell into step together. Riley trotted beside Garrett, her breath fogging in the cold air. You came asking about Eva Brennan before, Irene said. Now you're back. That means you didn't like what you found. That means I found more questions than answers. That's usually how it goes with her. They reached Irene's car, a sensible sedan, with snow tires and a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror. She unlocked it, but didn't get in. Instead, she turned to face Garrett, her expression tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. What do you want to know? She asked. Employment records, tax filings. Anything that shows Eva Brennan has worked at that diner. There's nothing. I already told you that. Nothing at all. 16 years and Margaret never filed a single piece of paperwork. Not that I can find, and I've looked. Irene pulled her coat tighter. 3 years ago, I got curious. Started digging through what records we have. Business licenses, tax assessments, health inspections. Margaret's name is on everything. Eva's name is nowhere. How does someone work 16 years without leaving a paper trail? They don't get paid. Irene said it simply like stating a fact of physics. No paycheck means no W-2. No W-2 means no tax record. No tax record means as far as the government's concerned, she doesn't exist. Garrett felt something cold settle in his chest. She's been working for free. Or for room and board, which Margaret probably calls generous, but legally it's the same thing, unpaid labor. And if Eva's never complained, never filed a report, never asked for help, then there's no crime to investigate. That's not right. No, it's not, but it's legal. Or legal enough that nobody's been able to do anything about it. Irene opened her car door. You want my advice? Let it go. Eva's made her choice. She's made it 100 times over 16 years. Some people don't want to be saved. Maybe they just need the right person to ask. Irene studied him for a long moment. Then she sighed. You're going to push this, aren't you? Yes. Then you should know something. Margaret's in trouble, financial trouble, the kind that makes people do desperate things. Garrett's attention sharpened. What kind of trouble? The kind that involves lawyers and collection agencies and threats. Irene got into her car but left the door open. Talk to Declan Hartwell. He knows more than I do. And be careful, Mr. Holloway. Desperate people are dangerous people. She closed the door and drove away, taillights disappearing into the gathering dark. Garrett stood in the parking lot, Riley at his side, thinking. Financial trouble, desperation, Eva. The pieces were starting to form a picture. He didn't like what he was seeing. Declan Hartwell's office was dark when Garrett arrived, but a light burned in the window above the hardware store. Garrett climbed the stairs and knocked. Footsteps. The door opened. Declan looked older in the evening light, more tired. He wore reading glasses and held a tumbler of something amber. When he saw Garrett, he didn't look surprised. Come in, he said. The office was warmer than before, heated by a small electric radiator in the corner. Declan gestured to the same chair. Garrett sat. Riley lay at his feet. You've been asking questions, Declan said. It wasn't an accusation, just observation. I need to understand what's happening. What's happening is the same thing that's been happening for 16 years. Margaret Hale controls Eva Brennan. Ava Brennan lets her. Declan took a sip from his glass. But the situation's changed recently. Margaret's debts are coming due. Irene mentioned that. What kind of debts? Declan pulled a file from a stack on his desk and opened it. Margaret borrowed money from the bank 15 years ago to keep the diner running. $50,000. She's been making minimum payments ever since, but the balance has barely moved. She still owes $47,000. That's not unusual for a small business. No, but that's not the problem. The problem is what came after. Declan pulled out another document. 3 years ago, Margaret took out a private loan. $80,000 from a company called Blackwood Development Group. They're based in Boston. They buy distressed properties, flip them, or tear them down for new construction. Why would she borrow from them? Because the bank wouldn't give her more money. She was already behind on her payments. Blackwood offered cash with no questions asked. Margaret was desperate enough to take it. Garrett felt the cold in his chest spread. What were the terms? Terrible. 20% interest. Balloon payment due in 3 years. Declan's mouth tightened. The 3 years are almost up. Margaret owes them $120,000. She has 45 days to pay. She doesn't have it. No, she doesn't. Which means Blackwood will take the diner, the land it sits on, everything. And Eva, Declan was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out one more document and slid it across the desk. It was a loan agreement dense with legal language. Garrett scanned it until he found the clause that made his jaw tighten. Collateral includes all tangible and intangible assets, including but not limited to property, equipment, and existing labor arrangements. Garrett looked up. Labor arrangements. Eva's worked there for 16 years without pay. Technically, she's an asset. If Margaret loses the diner, Blackwood could argue they have a claim to her continued labor. It's a legal gray area, but Blackwood specializes in gray areas. That's slavery. It's exploitation, and it's more common than you think. Declan took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I've tried to get Margaret to declare bankruptcy. Walk away clean, but she won't do it. She says she can't lose the diner. It's all she has. It's not hers to lose, not if it means Eva gets sold like property. I agree, but the law doesn't care what we think. It cares what can be proven in court. And right now, we can't prove Eva's being held against her will. She has to say it herself, and she won't. Garrett stood. Riley stood with him. Then I need to make sure Blackwood never gets the chance. How? I'll buy the diner myself. Declan stared at him. You have $130,000. I have enough, between savings and what I can borrow. That's your entire future. My future's not worth much if I spend it ignoring people who need help. Declan was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, I'll draw up the paperwork. But you need to understand something. Margaret's not going to sell easily. And even if she does, that doesn't solve Eva's problem. Eva still has to choose to leave. And she's spent 16 years choosing to stay. Then I'll give her a reason to choose differently. Garrett left the office and walked back to his truck. The street was empty now, the shops closed, the town settling into the quiet that came with winter nights in northern Maine. He sat in the driver's seat, engine off, staring at nothing. Riley put her head on his lap. We're in it now, Garrett said quietly. The dog's tail thumped once. The next morning, Garrett didn't go to the diner. He drove to the bank instead, met with the loan officer, a thin man in his 40s who looked at Garrett's military ID and bank statements with the expression of someone who'd seen too many veterans try to borrow money they'd never be able to pay back. But Garrett's credit was clean. His savings were real. And when he explained what he needed the money for, the loan officer's expression shifted from skepticism to something closer to respect. You're buying the Pine Diner? Yes. To help Eva Brennan? Yes. The loan officer was quiet for a moment. Then he said, my sister worked there for a while, 10 years ago. She said Margaret was cruel, said Eva looked like a ghost. He pulled out a form. I'll approve the loan, but you need to know what you're getting into. That place is barely breaking even. You'll be working just to keep the lights on. I'm not buying it to make money. Then why? Because some things are worth more than profit. The loan went through. It took 3 days. 3 days of paperwork and phone calls and waiting for approvals that felt like they'd never come. Garrett spent those days watching the diner from a distance, watching Eva arrive before dawn and leave after dark, watching Margaret move through the building like a warden checking cells. On the third day, Riley did something she'd never done before. They were parked across from the diner, engine idling, waiting for nothing in particular. Eva was visible through the window, wiping down tables. Margaret was behind the counter counting money. Riley whined. Garrett looked at her. What? The dog stared at the diner, her body tense. You want to go in? Riley whined again, louder. Garrett turned off the engine and got out. Riley jumped down and walked toward the diner, but she didn't go to the front door. She went around the side toward the narrow alley that led to the back entrance. Garrett followed. The alley smelled like old grease and rotting wood. A dumpster sat against one wall, overflowing with trash bags. Riley stopped at the back door. It was metal painted green with a handle instead of a knob. She sat and stared at it. What is it? Garrett asked. Riley didn't move. Garrett tried the handle, locked. He peered through the small window set into the door. The view showed a narrow hallway, dim and empty. At the far end, he could see part of the kitchen. Eva moved past carrying a tray. Then Margaret appeared. She stepped into the hallway, blocking Eva's path. Garrett couldn't hear what was being said, but he could see Margaret's mouth moving. Sharp, fast, angry. Eva's shoulders hunched. She tried to step around Margaret, but the older woman moved with her, staying in her way, trapping her. Riley growled, low and deep. Garrett's hands curled into fists. He watched as Margaret reached out and grabbed Eva's wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to control. Eva went still. Then Margaret let go and walked away. Eva stood there for a moment, alone in the hallway, her head down. Garrett stepped back from the door. His heart was pounding. His breathing was too fast. He recognized the feeling. Anger, the kind that lived in his chest like a cold that never went cold. Come on, he said to Riley. They walked back to the truck. Garrett sat behind the wheel, hands gripping it hard enough that his knuckles turned white. Riley watched him, her eyes steady. I know, he said. I know. That night, Garrett couldn't sleep. He sat at the table in the cabin drinking coffee that had gone cold when his phone buzzed at 2 a.m. Unknown number, he answered. Yeah. Heavy breathing, then a voice thin and shaking. Mr. Holloway. Garrett sat up straighter. Eva, I need help. Where are you? At the diner, please. I don't know what to do. I'm coming. Stay on the line. He grabbed his jacket and keys. Riley was already at the door, tail low, ears forward. They got in the truck and Garrett drove faster than he should have on the icy roads. Eva's breathing filled the cab through the phone's speaker. Ragged, scared. What happened? Garrett asked. Margaret's upset. She's been drinking. She's saying things. What kind of things? That she's going to lose everything. That it's my fault. That I owe her. Eva's voice cracked. She locked me in the storage room. I climbed out the window. I don't know where to go. Stay where you are. I'm 3 minutes out. He made it in 2. The diner's parking lot was empty except for Margaret's car. The building was dark except for a single light in the back. Garrett parked and got out. Riley jumped down beside him, her body coiled. Eva, Garrett called. A figure emerged from the shadows near the dumpster. Eva. She wore the same denim shirt, but it was untucked and torn at the sleeve. Her hair was loose, falling around her face. She was shaking. Garrett walked toward her slowly, hands visible. You're safe now. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called. I don't know why I called. You called because you needed help. That's the right thing to do. Eva shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You don't understand. She's going to be so angry. She's going to think I betrayed her. You didn't betray anyone. You're protecting yourself. No, I can't. I have to go back. I have to explain. She started to turn toward the diner. Garrett stepped in front of her. Don't. She needs me, Shyam. She's using you. You don't know her. She saved me. And then she trapped you. Those are 2 different things. Eva covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. Riley stepped forward and pressed against her legs, solid and warm. Eva looked down at her expression breaking. I don't know how to leave, she whispered. You don't have to know. You just have to say yes. Before Eva could respond, the back door of the diner slammed open. Margaret stood in the doorway, backlit by the dim interior light. She wore a bathrobe and slippers. Her hair was loose. In her hand was a bottle half empty. Eva, she shouted, get back in here. Eva flinched. I have to go. No, Garrett said. Margaret stumbled down the steps, her face flushed with anger and alcohol. Who the hell do you think you are coming here, turning her against me? I'm not turning her against you. I'm giving her a choice. She doesn't need a choice. She needs to remember who took care of her when no one else would. You didn't take care of her. You trapped her. Margaret's eyes blazed. Get off my property. This isn't about property. This is about a human being. She's not yours. She's not yours either. Margaret lunged toward Eva, but Riley stepped between them. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl. She just stood there, a wall of muscle and warning. Margaret stopped. Her breathing was heavy. Eva, please, come inside. We'll talk about this. I'll forgive you. Eva looked at Margaret, then at Garrett, then at Riley. I can't, she said quietly. Margaret's face crumpled. After everything I've done for you. I know, and I'm grateful, but I can't stay anymore. Where will you go? What will you do? You don't have anything. Then I'll start with nothing, but at least it'll be mine. Margaret's hand tightened around the bottle. For a moment, Garrett thought she might throw it, but then her grip loosened. The bottle fell to the ground, spilling whiskey across the gravel. You'll regret this, Margaret said, her voice hollow. Maybe, Eva replied, but I need to find out. Garrett opened the passenger door of his truck. Get in. Eva hesitated. Then she climbed inside. Riley jumped in after her, sitting between Eva and Garrett. They drove away, leaving Margaret standing in the parking lot alone under the pale glow of a single streetlight. Garrett took Eva to a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where you paid in cash and no one asked questions. He rented a room for a week and gave Eva the key. This gives you time to think, he said. No pressure, no expectations, just time. Eva stood in the doorway holding the key like it might disappear. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, just rest. Why are you doing this? Because someone should have done it 16 years ago. Eva's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't look away. Thank you. Garrett nodded and walked back to his truck. Riley followed. As they drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror. Eva was still standing in the doorway watching them go. The next morning, Garrett met with Declan Hartwell. The lawyer had the paperwork ready. Purchase agreement, transfer of deed, loan documents. You're sure about this? Declan asked. Yes. Once you sign, there's no going back. I know. Wash. Declan slid the papers across the desk. Garrett signed them. All of them. His entire future committed to ink and paper. I'll contact Margaret today, Declan said. Make the offer. She'll probably say no at first. Keep pushing. I will, but you need to prepare for the possibility that she won't sell. She's stubborn, and she's desperate. That's a dangerous combination. Garrett stood. Then we'll find another way. He left the office and drove to the diner. It was mid-morning, the breakfast rush over. A few customers sat at the counter. Walter Hayes was there nursing his usual coffee. Margaret was behind the counter. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her hands shook as she poured coffee. Garrett sat down. Walter glanced at him, then quickly looked away. Margaret set a cup in front of Garrett without a word. "We need to talk," Garrett said. "I have nothing to say to you." "Then listen, I'm making you an offer. $130,000 for the diner. Cash. Enough to pay off Blackwood and the bank. You walk away clean." Margaret's hands stilled. "You can't afford that." "I can, and I will." "Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do." Margaret laughed. It was a bitter sound, sharp and ugly. "The right thing? You think you're a hero. You think you're saving her. I'm giving her a choice. She'll fail out there without me. She doesn't know how to survive. Then she'll learn." Margaret slammed her hand on the counter. The customers looked up startled. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what she is." "I know she's a person. That's enough." Margaret's face twisted. For a moment, Garrett thought she might scream, but then the fight seemed to drain out of her. She sagged against the counter, her eyes empty. "Get out," she whispered. Garrett stood. As he turned to leave, Walter caught his eye. The old man nodded once, a small gesture of approval. Garrett walked out into the cold. Riley was waiting in the truck, watching him through the window. 2 days later, Declan called. She accepted the offer. Garrett felt something loosen in his chest. "We can close next week, but Garrett, she wants one condition." "What condition?" "She wants to talk to Eva one last time." Garrett was quiet. Then he said, "I'll ask her, but it's Eva's choice." He drove to the motel. Eva answered the door wearing clothes that weren't hers. A sweater someone had donated, jeans that were too big. She looked younger somehow, or maybe just less tired. "Margaret wants to see you," Garrett said. Eva's face went pale. "Why?" "I don't know, but you don't have to go. You don't owe her anything." Eva looked past him toward the road that led back to town. "I think I need to. For me, not for her." They drove to Declan's office. Margaret was already there, sitting in the same chair Garrett had occupied so many times. She looked smaller now, older. Eva walked in and stopped. The two women stared at each other. "I'm sorry," Margaret said finally. Eva didn't respond. "I didn't mean for it to turn out like this. I just needed help. And you were so grateful. And I thought maybe if you stayed long enough, you'd become like family." "I'm not your family," Eva said quietly. "I never was. I was just someone you could control." Margaret flinched. "I gave you a home, boss. You gave me a Baha'u'llah. I didn't know what else to do. The debt was crushing me, and you were there, and I thought if I could just hold on a little longer, everything would be okay." "It's not okay. It never was." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I know, and I'm sorry. I wish I'd been stronger. I wish I'd let you go years ago." Eva took a deep breath. "I wish you had too, but you didn't. And now I have to figure out who I am without you. Will you be all right?" "I don't know, but I'm going to try." Margaret nodded. She stood slowly like someone much older than 63. She looked at Garrett. "Take care of her." "She'll take care of herself," Garrett replied. Margaret left. The door closed behind her. Eva stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. "Are you okay?" Garrett asked. "No, but I will be." The closing happened on a Wednesday. Garrett signed more papers. Margaret signed papers. Money changed hands. The deed transferred. The diner became his. Margaret left Pinewood that afternoon, packed her car, and drove south without looking back. Garrett heard later that she moved to Arizona, a small apartment in a retirement community where she lived alone and didn't talk to her neighbors. Eva stayed in the motel for another week. Then she moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of town. One bedroom, a kitchen with a window, a yard where Riley could run. She enrolled in online classes at the community college. Psychology. She said she wanted to understand why people stayed in places that hurt them. Maybe help others find their way out. She got a part-time job at the library. Irene Walsh hired her without hesitation. And twice a week she came to the diner. Not to work, just to sit at the counter and drink coffee and talk to Walter Hayes and the other regulars who remembered her and were glad she was free. Garrett ran the diner himself, hired a cook, hired a waitress, made sure everyone got paid, made sure the books were clean. It wasn't profitable. It probably never would be, but it was clean, and that mattered. One evening as the sun set and the diner emptied out, Eva walked in. Riley got up from her spot by the door and greeted her, tail wagging. Eva sat at the counter. Garrett poured her coffee. "How are the classes?" he asked. "Hard, but good." "You'll do fine." "I hope so." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Eva said, "I never thanked you properly." "You don't need to." "Yes, I do. You saved my life." No, you saved your own life. I just held the door open. Eva smiled. It was small, but it was real. Then thank you for holding the door. Garrett nodded. Anytime. Outside, night settled over Pinewood. The snow fell soft and silent, covering the town in white. Inside the diner, the lights were warm, and the coffee was hot, and for the first time in 16 years, Eva Brennan was free. And that Garrett thought was worth every dollar he'd spent. But freedom he was about to learn came with a price that money couldn't pay. Spring came late to Pinewood. It always did. The snow didn't vanish in dramatic melts or sudden thaws. It retreated inch by inch, leaving the ground dark and wet and stubborn. By early April, the pines had started to lose their burden of white, and the roads showed more gravel than ice. The mornings still bit cold, but the afternoons held something softer. Something that felt like possibility. Garrett stood outside the diner at 6 in the morning, a mug of coffee steaming in his hand. The building looked different now. He'd replaced the broken boards on the porch, fixed the sign so all the letters lit properly, painted the trim a dark green that didn't try too hard. The place would never be beautiful, but it was clean. Honest. That mattered more. Riley sat beside him, her graying muzzle lifted toward the wind. She was slower these days. 7 years had become 8, and the years were starting to show in the white around her eyes and the careful way she climbed into the truck. But her attention was still sharp, still focused. The door opened behind them. Vernon Kemp stepped out, the police chief's uniform crisp despite the early hour. He was 58, built like someone who'd played football in high school and never quite let it go. His face was weathered, his eyes tired but kind. Good coffee, Vernon said. Should be. I paid too much for it. No, Vernon smiled faintly. You're doing good work here, Garrett. People notice. I'm not doing it for people to notice. I know. That's why they do. Vernon took a sip, looking out at the empty street. You heard from Eva lately? She comes by twice a week, sometimes more. How's she doing? Better. Still figuring things out, but better. Vernon nodded. He was quiet for a moment, then said, You know there's talk. There's always talk. This is different. People saying you spent your whole savings on this place, saying you'll never break even, saying you did it for a woman who's not even working here anymore. Garrett looked at him. And I wanted you to know I told them to shut their mouths. Vernon's voice was calm but firm. What you did took courage, real courage, the kind most people don't have. I just did what needed doing. That's what courage is. Vernon finished his coffee and handed the mug back. He walked to his patrol car, paused with his hand on the door. For what it's worth, you made this town a little better. Not many people can say that. He drove away, leaving Garrett standing in the early light with Riley at his feet and the weight of something he couldn't quite name settling in his chest. Not pride, not satisfaction. Something quieter. Something that felt like he'd finally done one thing right after a lifetime of getting things wrong. The diner opened at 7. Garrett went inside and started the coffee. The cook, a man named Ray, who'd worked fishing boats until his back gave out, arrived at 6:30 and started the grill. The waitress, a young woman named Beth, showed up at 6:45, tied her apron, and began setting tables. It was a small operation, clean, simple. Everyone got paid on time. Everyone went home when their shift ended. No one worked for free. No one got trapped. The breakfast rush was modest, a dozen customers between 7 and 9. Walter Hayes in his usual spot, a couple of truckers passing through, a woman from the county office who ordered eggs and toast and left a good tip. By 9:30, the diner had settled into its mid-morning lull. Garrett was wiping down the counter when the bell over the door chimed. He looked up. The man who walked in wore a suit, charcoal gray, tailored, expensive. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He was mid-40s, lean, with dark hair combed back and a face that had learned to smile without warmth. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Riley stood up from her spot by the door. She didn't growl, didn't bark. But her body went still in that particular way that made Garrett's attention sharpen. The man stopped just inside the entrance, glancing around the diner with an expression that suggested he was cataloging everything for later use. Then his eyes settled on Garrett. Mr. Holloway, he asked. His voice was smooth, professional. That's right. My name is Silas Crane. I represent Blackwood Development Group. He walked to the counter and set his briefcase down. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Garrett kept his expression neutral. About what? About this property and about a debt that's recently been transferred to new ownership. Garrett felt something cold move through him. Margaret Hale's debt was paid off, in full. Yes, to the bank and to Blackwood for the principal amount owed. Silas opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. However, there were additional penalties and fees outlined in the original loan agreement. Penalties that accrued during the final months of Mrs. Hale's delinquency. Those penalties were not included in your purchase agreement. How much? $38,000. The number hung in the air like smoke. Garrett's jaw tightened. That's not my debt. Technically, when you purchased Umpted property, you assumed all liabilities associated with it, including outstanding penalties. Silas pulled out a document and slid it across the counter. This is the original loan agreement Mrs. Hale signed. Page 7, Section 4, Subsection C. I've highlighted the relevant clause. Garrett picked up the document and read. The language was dense, deliberately convoluted, but Silas was right. The clause was there. This is predatory, Garrett said. This is legal. Silas smiled. And enforceable. I'll talk to my lawyer. By all means, but I should tell you Blackwood has never lost a case involving this particular clause. We've been doing this for 15 years. We know how to write contracts that hold up in court. Garrett set the document down carefully. His hands wanted to shake. He didn't let them. What do you want? The same thing we wanted from Mrs. Hale. Payment in full. You have 45 days. And if I don't pay, then we take the property, just like we would have taken it from her. Silas closed his briefcase. I understand you spent a great deal of money acquiring this place, Mr. Holloway. It would be a shame to lose it over a relatively small amount. $38,000 isn't small. It is to Blackwood. Silas walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back. Riley was still standing, her body positioned between him and Garrett. Interesting, military. Yes. I thought so. They have a way of recognizing threats, don't they? Silas's smile didn't reach his eyes. 45 days, Mr. Holloway. I'll be in touch. He left. The bell chimed, the door closed. Riley relaxed fractionally, but she didn't sit. She watched the street through the window, tracking Silas's black sedan as it pulled away. Garrett stood behind the counter, his mind racing. $38,000. He didn't have it. He'd spent everything on the purchase, the loan, the repairs. His savings were gone. He had maybe $4,000 in his checking account and another $2,000 in emergency funds. That was it. He pulled out his phone and called Declan Hartwell. The lawyer answered on the second ring. Garrett, I just had a visit from Silas Crane. There was a pause, then Declan said, damn. He says I owe Blackwood $38,000 in penalties. He's right. I saw that clause when I reviewed the original loan agreement, but I thought it had been waived as part of the settlement. It wasn't. Then we have a problem. Declan's voice was grim. Blackwood sued over this exact issue before. They always win. The courts say the contract is clear and the borrower agreed to the terms. So what do I do? Pay them or lose the diner? I can't pay them. I don't have the money. Declan was quiet for a long moment. Then we need to find another way. Garrett ended the call and stood there staring at the counter. Around him, the diner hummed with quiet activity. Ray flipping eggs, Beth refilling coffee, Walter reading his newspaper. Normal, peaceful. It felt fragile now, like something that could shatter. Riley walked over and pressed against his leg. Garrett reached down and rested his hand on her head. The weight of her was solid, real. We'll figure it out, he said quietly. The dog's tail moved once. That afternoon, Garrett drove to Eva's house. It was a small rental on the east side of town, a single story with white siding and a porch that sagged slightly on one side. The yard was mostly dirt, but someone had planted flowers along the walkway. They hadn't bloomed yet, but they would. Eva opened the door before he knocked. She wore jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked different these days, less guarded, more present. I saw your truck, she said. Come in. The inside of the house was sparse but clean. A couch, a table, a bookshelf filled with textbooks. Riley went straight to Eva and sat beside her, leaning into her leg. Eva smiled and scratched behind the dog's ears. Coffee, she asked. Sure. They sat at the small kitchen table. Eva poured 2 cups and handed one to Garrett. You look worried. I am. What happened? Garrett told her. About Silas Crane, about the debt, about the 45 days he had to come up with money he didn't have. Eva listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You're going to lose the diner. Maybe. Because of me. No, because of Margaret's debt, and because I walked into this with my eyes open. But you did it to help me. I did it because it was right. Garrett looked at her. And I'd do it again. Eva's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I can help. I have some money saved from the library job. Not much, but no. Garrett, no, you're building a life. You don't sacrifice that for this. Then what are you going to do? I don't know yet. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the light was fading. Riley lay at their feet, her breathing slow and even. Finally, Eva said, Margaret destroyed herself in trying to hold on to something she couldn't keep. Don't make the same mistake. I'm not trying to hold on. I'm trying to finish what I started. Sometimes finishing means letting go. Garrett looked at her. You think I should walk away? I think you should do what's best for you, not what you think you owe to me or anyone else. And if what's best for me is seeing this through, Eva smiled sadly, then I'll be here when it's over. Garrett drove home as night settled over the town. The cabin was cold when he arrived. He built a fire in the wood stove and sat at the table staring at nothing. Riley lay in her corner watching him. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Holloway, this is Silas Crane. I wanted to follow up on our conversation. Blackwood is willing to negotiate. If you're interested in discussing alternatives to full payment, please call me. Garrett stared at the message. Alternatives, that meant terms, conditions, things that would put him under Blackwood's control the same way Margaret had been. He deleted the message. The next morning, Walter Hayes was waiting outside the diner when Garrett arrived to open up. The old man stood by the door, hands in his coat pockets, breath fogging in the cold air. Morning, Garrett said. Morning, I heard you got trouble. News travels fast. It's a small town, people talk. Walter followed Garrett inside. I also heard what kind of trouble. Blackwood Development. Garrett started the coffee. Yeah, they're vultures. Buy up distressed properties and squeeze every last dollar out of them. Usually by finding legal loopholes that let them take more than they're owed. That's about right. Walter was quiet while Garrett worked. Then he said, You know, I've lived in this town my whole life, seen a lot of people come and go. Most of them were just passing through. But every now and then someone shows up who actually gives a damn. You're one of those. I'm just trying to do right. That's what I mean. Walter pulled an envelope from his coat and set it on the counter. There's $5,000 in there. It's not much, but it's what I can spare. Garrett stared at the envelope. Walter Mason, don't argue. You helped Eva. You saved this diner from becoming another empty building. This town owes you. I'm just the first one paying. Before Garrett could respond, the door opened. Irene Walsh walked in, followed by Vernon Kemp, then Beth the waitress, then Ray the cook, then a dozen other people, faces Garrett recognized from morning coffee and quiet meals. They filled the diner, standing shoulder to shoulder, and one by one they set envelopes on the counter. Cash, checks, money orders. Small amounts, most of them. $20, $50, $100 from Vernon, $200 from a couple who owned the hardware store. Garrett stood there, unable to speak. Walter smiled. Like I said, this town owes you. By the time everyone left, there was $8,000 on the counter. It wasn't enough, not even close, but it was something. It was people who cared, people who saw what he'd done and decided it mattered. Riley sat beside the pile of money, her tail wagging slowly. Garrett sat down at the counter and put his head in his hands. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried since Kuwait, but he came close. That afternoon, Declan called again. I've been looking for options. There might be one. I'm listening. We file for an injunction, argue that the penalty clause was hidden in the contract and constitutes fraud. It's a long shot, but it might buy you time. How much time? 6 months, maybe a year if we get lucky. But Garrett, you need to understand something. Even if we win the injunction, you'll still owe the money eventually. This just delays the inevitable. Then what's the point? The point is time. Time to raise the money, time to find another way, time to make sure you don't lose everything in 45 days. Garrett thought about it, about the people who'd given what they could, about Eva building a life one careful step at a time, about the diner clean and honest and worth fighting for. File it, he said. The weeks that followed were a blur. Declan filed the injunction. Blackwood fought it. The hearing was scheduled for late May, just before the 45-day deadline expired. Garrett kept the diner running, kept showing up, kept pouring coffee and making sure people got fed. The town kept showing up too, more customers than before. People who'd never set foot in the place suddenly appeared for breakfast, lunch, dinner. They didn't say much, they didn't have to. Their presence was enough. Eva came by every day now. She'd sit at the counter and help with paperwork, or she'd wipe down tables, or she'd just talk to Riley while the dog dozed in her corner. She was different, stronger. The fear that had lived in her shoulders was gone, replaced by something that looked like hope. One evening after the last customer left, she stayed. Garrett locked the door and poured them both coffee. They sat at the counter in the quiet. "I got accepted," Eva said. Garrett looked at her. "Accepted to what?" "Full-time program. Psychology. Starts in the fall." She smiled, but her eyes were uncertain. "I'd have to move. Portland, it's 2 hours away." "That's amazing." "It's terrifying." "That too." Eva laughed softly. "I keep thinking about what you said, about finishing what you start. I started something when I left Margaret, and now I need to finish it. But it means leaving here, leaving you, leaving Riley. We'll still be here when you visit. What if you're not? What if Blackwood takes the diner? What if you have to leave?" Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Then I'll leave knowing I did everything I could, and you'll keep going, building the life you deserve. That's how this works." Eva reached across the counter and took his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing me what it looks like to not give up." The hearing came on a Tuesday in late May. Garrett wore the only suit he owned, a dark blue thing he'd bought for his father's funeral 20 years ago. It still fit barely. Declan wore his lawyer clothes, professional and sharp. They sat in the courtroom and waited. Silas Crane arrived with 2 other lawyers, all of them in expensive suits, all of them carrying briefcases that probably cost more than Garrett's truck. The judge was a woman in her 60s, gray-haired and severe. She listened to Declan's argument about fraud and hidden clauses and predatory lending. Then she listened to Blackwood's lawyers argue about clear contracts and willing participants and legal obligations. It took 40 minutes. When it was over, the judge looked at Garrett. "Mr. Holloway, I understand what you're trying to do, and I respect it, but the law is clear. The contract was signed, the terms were outlined. Mrs. Hale had the opportunity to read it. The fact that she didn't, or that she didn't understand it, doesn't constitute fraud." Garrett felt the floor drop out from under him. "However," the judge continued, "I am troubled by the timing and amount of these penalties. I'm granting a temporary injunction. Blackwood cannot take action on this debt for 90 days. During that time, Mr. Holloway will have the opportunity to negotiate or secure financing. After 90 days, if the debt remains unpaid, Blackwood may proceed." The gavel came down. 90 days. 3 months. It wasn't enough. But it was something. Garrett walked out of the courtroom with Declan beside him. Silas Crane was waiting in the hall. "90 days, Mr. Holloway," Silas said. "Make them count." Garrett didn't respond. He just walked past Riley at his side and out into the spring air. That night, Garrett sat in the cabin and thought about Kuwait, about the desert and the fire and the weight of Corporal Jenkins dying in his arms, about how he'd spent 28 years carrying that weight, believing he'd failed. But maybe failure wasn't about what you couldn't save. Maybe it was about what you refused to try. He'd tried. With Eva. With the diner. With something bigger than himself. And even if he lost, even if Blackwood took everything, he'd still tried. That had to count for something. Riley put her head on his knee. Garrett scratched behind her ears. "We're not done yet," he said. The dog's tail thumped once against the floor. Summer came to Pinewood with warmth that felt like forgiveness. The days stretched longer. The pines lost their snow entirely. The diner's windows stayed open, letting in air that smelled like grass and wildflowers instead of ice and decay. Garrett kept working, kept trying, kept hoping that 90 days would be enough. On the 85th day, Vernon Kemp walked into the diner with a folder under his arm. His face was grim. "I've got news," he said. Garrett poured him coffee. "Good or bad? Depends on how you look at it." Vernon opened the folder. "Blackwood Development is under federal investigation. Wire fraud, racketeering, predatory lending. The FBI raided their offices yesterday. Silas Crane was arrested this morning." Garrett stared at him. "What? They've been running this scam for years, hiding penalty clauses in contracts, collecting debts that were legally questionable at best. The feds have been building a case for 18 months. It finally came together. What does that mean for the diner? It means all of Blackwood's current actions are frozen, including their claim on your property. It'll take months, maybe years to sort through everything. But by the time it's done, there's a good chance the debt will be dismissed entirely." Garrett sat down slowly. He felt like he'd been holding his breath for 3 months and only just now remembered how to exhale. "You're going to be okay," Vernon said. "You and the diner. You are going to be okay." Riley walked over and put her head in Garrett's lap. He rested his hand on her neck and closed his eyes. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We are." Ava left for Portland in August. She came to the diner the day before to say goodbye. Garrett made her lunch on the house. They sat at the counter and talked about small things, classes, books, the weather. When it was time to go, Eva hugged Riley first. The dog leaned into her patient and steady. Then Eva hugged Garrett. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "Go build something good," and he said. "I will." She left. The door chimed. The diner felt emptier without her. But 3 months later, she came back for a weekend. She looked different, confident, happy. She told Garrett about her classes, about the friends she'd made, about the internship she'd started at a women's shelter. "I'm helping people like me," she said, "people who don't know how to leave." "You're good at that." "I learned it from the best." The diner survived. More than survived, it became something the town was proud of. A place where people were treated right, where the coffee was strong and the food was honest and no one got trapped. Garrett kept running it, kept showing up, kept doing the work. And every morning Riley sat by the door and watched the world go by, her amber eyes still sharp, still seeing things others missed. One morning in early winter, a young woman walked in. She was 25, maybe younger. Her face was pale, her eyes frightened. She sat at the counter and ordered coffee with shaking hands. Riley stood up. She walked over to the woman and sat beside her, close enough to touch. The woman looked down at the bow and something in her expression cracked. "Are you okay?" Garrett asked quietly. The woman shook her head. "No, but I don't know where else to go." Garrett poured her coffee. "You're safe here. Take your time." The woman's name was Lena Cassidy. She'd been running from something, someone. She didn't say who, didn't have to. Garrett called Eva. Eva drove up from Portland that same day. She sat with Lena, talked to her, listened. By the end of the week, Lena had a plan, a shelter, a lawyer, a chance. She left with hope in her eyes instead of fear. And Garrett understood finally what all of this had been for. Not just Eva, not just the diner, but something bigger. Something that kept going person by person, one act of courage at a time. Riley knew. She'd known from the beginning. That night, Garrett sat in the cabin with Riley beside him. The fire crackled in the stove. The world outside was cold and dark, but inside was warm. "You were right," Garrett said to the dog. "Back at the beginning, you saw it before I did." Riley's tail thumped against the floor. Garrett rested his hand on her head and closed his eyes. For the first time in 28 years, the weight in his chest felt lighter. Not gone, it would never be gone, but lighter, and that was enough.